Hello everybody, my name is Andrew Bauer and I'm an animator who really likes doing cartoons like 2D animation. It's just more fun for me than 3D stuff, so it's kind of what I tinker with when I got the time for it. And every time I show somebody in any of my animated thingies, they're usually like, "Oh my god, how did you do that?" And I'm like, well, so I figured I'd do this to make it easier on you, really understand how and why, and show you how it all goes down, rather than try and explain. Short version is here's 800 drawings done in a row and flippy cartoon. So this little clip I've got. So yeah, that's what this channel is going to hopefully be sticking to. 2D animation because I love it. This is my first go around making a little tutorial talky talk video like this, so I'm gonna probably look back at this one day and be like, oh my god, what a doofus. Anyway, what I'm doing right here, that last little section, was stretching out the frame count so that the timing of each frame is going to be on screen for a longer period of time, so it's not just going to blast right by and disappear before you see what's going on. I know it looks a little bit epileptic right here with it really being twitchy, and that's because everything's sped up super fast. But I'm flipping between frames. It's really important to do that for 2D animation so that you can make sure all your drawing fits in with the drawings in front of and behind it, so that it all flows properly. If it's not in the right place, it's going to flicker and dance, like whatever different features you're talking about, like the eyeball or the corner of her mouth. It's not going to move smoothly, so that's why I'm flipping back and forth constantly to double check and make sure everything's in the right place. If you're doing this on regular 2D animation, like on paper, you do that by just flipping the pages with your fingers. Instead, I've got a separate little keypad plugged into my computer so I can flip back and forth between keyframes touching the button. Makes things a lot easier than clicking back and forth on the timeline. Anyway, you can see I've already got a lot of the rough shapes kind of scribbled in there in blue, and now I'm going through and cleaning it all up and making it a little bit more defined and recognizable instead of just a blue, smeary, sketchy splatter, so that it's a little easier to keep track of all the different, facial features, the line down the back of her neck. Oh, one of the things that makes digital 2D animation the best is what I just did there, scaling and warping and changing the position of her mouth, because you can't do that on paper. Copy paste, that's you gotta do that by hand. It's a pain in the butt. You can't just move her eyeball around like that. You'd have to erase it and redraw the whole thing. So there's lots of great time-saving features in 2D animation, digital 2D animation, that doesn't exist when you're doing it on paper. The downside to that is when you're on paper, you got to plan it out a lot better, and it leads to being smarter about how you spend your time, because you're not so spoiled with all the features digital stuff has for you. Like if I can just move her eyeball back like that, it's a lot easier here. The downside is I'm blowing right past the whole concept of timing charts. I don't have to interact with an assistant animator. I'm doing everything myself. But dipping down into the timeline and moving frames around, rather than planning out ahead of time and figuring out this frame is going to be on screen for this drawing's on screen for this long, and this before the next keyframe shows up, I just wiggle things around in the timeline until I'm like, oh yeah, that looks about right, instead of actually planning it out. I get the luxury of doing that because I'm just doing it all myself and I don't have to be a part of a team or anything. But it's something that is important. And if you're doing it on paper, you would be better at that and know that, instead of just blowing right past it because you got the digital tools to kind of spoil you. Anyway, this particular clip started out as just her staying still and it being an animated loop of her hair blowing around in the wind. I decided to add a whole bunch more, and that's what you're watching now, is me doing her, pull her ponytail out and flip her hair back. I did the whole motion of her head first, and one of the things that is kind of dumb, or rather, why I'm kind of dumb, is like, you don't want to draw stuff that's not going to be seen, and a lot of the stuff is going to get covered up by other stuff. She's got a jacket on, so I spent a whole bunch of time defining out like where her shoulders and back and shoulder blades are, and all that stuff's going to get covered up by a big baggy jacket later, so I kind of wasted a bunch of time there. And right here, well, you'll see in a little bit that all of the stuff I did with her hair in the back, I didn't really plan out very well either, and I'm going to have to go back and fix that later, because most of the hair on her head's been shaved off. She's only got that little stripe down the middle, which means there's not a whole lot of volume of hair. It's not going to cover up her whole head when it's just floating down. That plus, she's flipping her head in the opposite direction of where the hair is falling in this particular shot. So you'll see in a second, I'm going to revisit this, and yeah, now you can see me watching the timing and getting it all figured out. So here's where I'm revisiting it and drawing in red the corrections where most of the hair on the back of her head is going to flop around behind her neck in the opposite direction, rather than floating back and covering her face the way it was in the previous incarnation of this particular set of drawings. And I also realized I got to break it down. Hair is just a big amorphous blob a lot of times, but you got to figure out how it's going to work by dividing it into chunks. And I kind of did that here, where there's that front bit which has got the blue drawings on it, and then there's the back bit where it flips out, and then there's that other chunk that ends up behind her ear. Anyway, I had to kind of rethink how her hair's falling, and now I'm cleaning up those corrections that I made just a minute ago. And that's part of how it goes. You're going to go back and correct and adjust and change things constantly through the whole course of this whole process of making things like this in the first place. There's other animators who can, a little more experienced than I am, who can be like, boop, nailed it in the first try or whatever, but I don't know. I redraw and revisit things constantly until it gets to the end of it. So that middle section is kind of going to slide forward and get cut in half by her ear. Or some of it covers her face and the rest is behind her ear. And the other stuff kind of flops around behind her neck. That's the part I'm detailing right now. But even here you can see that I readjust things, because it's not like her hair's changing length, so you got to keep volume in mind. And the magnitude of the flippiness wasn't up to par, so that's what this adjustment's for, to make it flop out even more. This is the last little bit here where you got to follow through is the thing, slow in and slow out. So when her hair is starting to settle into that final position is that last bit I'm drawing. Now this section is where I go and cover up a bunch of that work that I've already done with that jacket I mentioned earlier. Looks good. I like the jacket, but it kind of makes all that time I spent getting her shoulders figured out less than ideal use of my time. I'll say it that way. Anyway, I like to go through and like, oh, all this stuff's going to get adjusted, paint it red, and then draw over top of it in black. It's just a way of making notes for myself of what to adjust and change. Have her color. Yeah, anyway. Poof, the end. Here's the final product. Hooray.